At high noon, my John Deere nudged the shiny HOA gate like a bull tapping a swinging saloon door, then lifted, curled, and peeled it off its hinges with a satisfying metallic groan. The keypad made a delicate death beep before going dark forever. Behind me, a trailer full of hay bales and a very opinionated goat choir bleated their enthusiastic approval. Ahead, the HOA president screamed vandal at the top of her lungs while her poodle in a designer neckerchief fainted dramatically onto a yoga mat. The whole scene looked like a modern Western showdown, except instead of tumbleweeds, we had luxury SU versus stopping to gawk. I'm Nolan Pike, quiet owner of a 12-acre parcel at the edge of Coyote Vista Ranch Estates, a development in Juniper Mesa where tumbleweeds and townhomes coexist under increasingly tense truce. I restore old tractors, grill on Tuesdays, and generally enjoy being ignored by my neighbors. My property predates the development by 40 years, something the newcomers seem to forget. Enter Meredith Bllelock, HOA monarch and collector of weaponized clipboards. To Meredith, my gravel ranch road, recorded on the plat since bell-bottoms and disco were in fashion, looked like a personal affront to resale values and her fleet of dust-sensitive luxury SU versus. The harassment started small but escalated quickly. First came the passive-aggressive newsletter articles about maintaining property standards and the importance of paved surfaces. Then the board installed speed bumps on my easement road that looked medically concerning, like concrete tumors designed by someone who hated both vehicles and spines. Then came the orange cones, strategically placed to make my road nearly impassable. Then the no ranch traffic signs zip-tied to every creosote bush within 50 feet of the road. I showed Meredith my deeded ingress and egress easement, a document older than her Botox. She squinted at it like it was poorly written fan fiction, then claimed it must be outdated. The next week I woke at 5 a.m. to feed the animals and found a brand new aluminum gate straddling the HOA boundary like a shiny drawbridge to nowhere. It came complete with a digital keypad and a laminated schedule showing 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. access only, subject to board discretion and prior approval. My hay deliveries come at dawn because that's when the delivery drivers work. Calves don't read schedules and certainly don't wait for board approval when they're hungry. I asked for a code and Meredith offered me a committee meeting scheduled for next month. Then she locked the emergency pull mechanism with a heavy-duty padlock, claiming it was for vandal deterrence. My neighbor texted me that evening saying the board was calling it the Bllelock barrier in the meeting minutes. Real cute. 2 ugly incidents happened that changed everything and showed just how dangerous Meredith's power trip had become. First, a grass fire licked the ridgeline one scorching afternoon when the wind was howling like a banshee. The county emergency alert blasted every phone in the valley with that horrible screech. I immediately hitched my 500-gallon water trailer and rolled toward the fire road, knowing every minute counted. But there it was, Meredith's gate, locked tight as a drum. No code. No emergency override. The flames stayed mercifully distant that day thanks to a wind shift, but I spent 10 minutes arguing with a keypad while the horizon turned an angry butterscotch color. I couldn't help my neighbors, couldn't get my firefighting equipment through, all because one woman needed to feel important. The second incident was pure bureaucratic warfare. The HOA certified me a letter printed on their fancy letterhead demanding I cease and desist using what they called community infrastructure or face daily fines of $500. They were actually claiming my deeded easement road, the one that existed before their houses were even blueprints, was now community infrastructure under their control. That's when I called the county fire marshal and emailed him drone footage of the locked gate blocking the clearly marked fire road. He replied in 20 minutes with County Statute 472.6 about obstructed emergency access highlighted in yellow like a love letter from Lady Justice herself. His follow-up email was even better, stating this was a criminal violation and immediate removal was required or the HOA would face penalties of up to $1,000 per day. The next morning at sunrise, after sending one last email to the board that was predictably ignored, I started up my John Deere and attached the front loader. The morning air was crisp and perfect for some light demolition work. The tractor gently approached the Bllelock barrier and removed it from its posts, setting it down beside the road like a toddler carefully relocating a toy they weren't supposed to touch. I kept the keypad completely intact because I'm nothing if not polite. Meredith must have been watching through binoculars because she called 911 before I even turned off the engine. I just smiled and waved at her from the cab. Deputy Connors arrived and looked at my deed, studied the recorded easement with its official county seal, and read the fire marshal's urgent notice I had thoughtfully taped to the HOA mailbox in bright red letters that said remove gate immediately or face criminal penalties. Deputy Connors scratched his head, sighed deeply, then told Meredith in the tired voice of someone who deals with HOA drama too often, "Ma'am, this gate cannot be here, it's blocking emergency access." She responded by announcing with great theatrical flair that she was suing me for felonious destruction of property and gate shredding with malicious intent. The deputy just shook his head and radioed for the fire marshal, who arrived 15 minutes later with a clipboard and the determined energy of a man who takes fire safety very seriously. The fire marshal took one look at the situation, photographed everything, and started writing citations like he was getting paid by the page. Meredith tried to explain about property values and community aesthetic standards, but he cut her off mid-sentence with a raised hand. "You knowingly blocked an emergency access road after being notified of the violation," he said flatly. "That's a criminal offense, not a civil matter. The HOA sued me anyway, because of course they did. The complaint alleged property damage, criminal trespass, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and somehow, incredibly, emotional distress damages for Meredith's poodle who allegedly required therapy after witnessing the gate removal. The courtroom smelled like old toner and fresh regret. My attorney, a sharp woman who specialized in easement law, rolled in with a cart full of evidence. She had the original plat map from 1968, the recorded easement language, the fire marshal's official letter, and the crown jewel, text messages where Meredith explicitly instructed the gate installer to ignore any ranch person who complains and to make sure the gate was, quote, impossible to override without board approval, end quote. The fire marshal testified for 30 minutes about blocked emergency access, explaining in detail how my water trailer could have helped contain the recent fire if I'd been able to get through. He showed photos of other fires in the area and explained response time statistics. The gate installer, clearly uncomfortable, admitted under oath that the HOA specifically refused to install a Knox box for emergency services because Meredith said it would compromise their security measures. He also testified that Meredith had asked him to weld the emergency release shut, which he refused to do. Meredith took the stand and performed what could only be described as a Shakespearean monologue about aesthetic cohesion and community standards. She had prepared a 60-slide PowerPoint presentation about property values in gated communities versus non-gated communities. She presented color-coded charts about dust particles per cubic meter near gravel roads. She had graphs showing the correlation between ranch traffic and decreased property values, though her data was from a study in New Jersey about industrial farms, not small ranches. She brought in a pet psychologist who testified via Zoom that her poodle, Princess Buttercup, was suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder after witnessing the gate removal. The judge's face remained completely expressionless through all of this, occasionally taking notes. After 3 hours of testimony, the judge blinked exactly twice, adjusted his glasses, and delivered his ruling in a tone that suggested he was done with everyone's nonsense. He issued a permanent injunction against the HOA. They were barred forever from obstructing my easement in any way. They had to remove all obstructions, including the speed bumps and signs, within 72 hours. If they wanted any gate at all, they had to pay for a compliant emergency access gate with a Knox box at their expense. Most deliciously, they had to reimburse me for what the judge called reasonable mitigation costs, a phrase that included tractor time at the going rate of $75 per hour, my attorney fees, and the time I spent dealing with their nonsense at my consulting rate of $150 per hour. My counterclaim for interference with deeded easement and private nuisance was granted in full. The judge calculated the damages meticulously. There were fines for blocking emergency access at $1,000 per day for 14 days. My legal fees came to $18,000. The tractor rental equivalent was $300. Lost hay delivery fees from having to reschedule were $800. The judge even awarded damages for intentional infliction of emotional distress, not for me, but humorously for my goats who had their feeding schedule disrupted, which he valued at $500 to make a point. The total judgment came to $47,300. The judge's final words before bringing down his gavel were delivered with the weight of someone who had seen too many petty HOA disputes. Roads meant for rescue are not for committees to control, and easements recorded before your corporation existed are not suggestions, they are legal facts. But Meredith's troubles were just beginning. The fire marshal had filed separate criminal charges for willful obstruction of emergency services under state law. She was found guilty of a Class A misdemeanor after a brief trial where she tried to argue that aesthetic standards superseded fire codes. The criminal court judge, even less amused than the civil judge, sentenced her to 200 hours of community service specifically related to fire safety education, and fined her an additional $15,000 payable to the county fire safety fund. She was also placed on probation for 1 year with the special condition that she could not serve on any HOA board or committee during that time. That same evening, the HOA board held an emergency session in the community center. The treasurer had already calculated that between the civil judgment, legal fees, and the cost of installing a proper emergency gate, the HOA would need a special assessment of $800 per household to cover the costs. The room erupted in angry shouting. Meredith was removed from her position by a unanimous vote, with even her usual allies voting against her. Every single board member raised their hand for her removal. She was then assigned, as part of her community service, to serve as emergency access liaison, which was bureaucratic speak for spending her Saturdays repainting fire lane curbs under the direct supervision of the same fire marshal she had called, to his face during the trial, an overzealous hose jockey with a god complex. The Bllelock barrier was ultimately recycled into 3 benches for the community dog park, each one branded with a bronze plaque reading in memory of bad ideas, with the date of its removal. The HOA treasurer cut the settlement check with shaking hands, and it made a sound like a car door slamming when she set it on the table. The look on Meredith's face when the judge announced $47,300 in damages was pure shocked disbelief, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Her clipboard clattered to the courtroom floor, papers scattering everywhere. When the criminal judge added 200 hours of community service and the $15,000 fine, her voice cracked into a whisper as she said, "But I was just protecting our property values."